so sorry to anyone who missed out, but I figure you can live a little bit vicariously through me. I'm gonna go ahead and show it to you because maybe you're waiting to see. Well, you probably already saw it on the thumbnail. It's the two books, and they are so gorgeous. There are so many little details in it, and we're gonna do a close-up look in a bit. I will flip it open, we'll take the dust jacket off, and look at what it looks like underneath. There's artwork in the books. Oh, and here's the edges. There's artwork. We'll look at all the artwork, and it's signed by Leigh Bardugo, which is really exciting. And on the back it says, "No mourners, no funerals," which you know if you've read Six of Crows. So we'll look at that in a bit. First, let's unbox what's in the rest of the box. That was my little story about buying it. Oh, and then it was delivered while I was away in Europe. So I was like, oh my gosh, of all times, it's gonna be while I'm away. It was a few days before I got back, and I had my friend come and pick it up because I was like so worried, what if someone steals it? That was very nice. So we have a little card that says "Into the Grishaverse," and it describes everything on the back. And then we have a bunch of stuff that my cat would probably go crazy with. Hopefully I didn't wake him up. He's sleeping like right behind me. I tried to think of a way to include him in this video. I was like, what if I put him in my bookcase? But that sounds like a recipe for disaster, and I don't want the whole thing tumbling down because Pippin took a diving leap off of it. Let's start with I have opened this, but I've left everything in here so that I can unbox it again with you. Let's start with the most exciting object. Six of Crows mug, and it says proper fuel for proper thieves, and on this side it says best brew in the barrel, Ketterdam Coffee Company. Now I actually really like this. I'm kind of a sucker for a themed mug. As you may remember from my last OwlCrate box, I basically bought the whole box just to get a themed mug that came in it, which was a Cruel Prince themed mug. It was really cool. I love it. I drink tea from it almost every day. And I love this wooden using it. I think it's like hand wash only, which is kind of, I mean, I don't mind hand washing my mugs just to be safe. I think you can't microwave it either. That's okay, but it's nice. I do really like this. I'll give you like a little close-up of the mug here. You can see the details. It has like the Ketterdam skyline along it, and I do think this is really cool. I love the idea of it being in-universe branding. That's pretty cool. So definitely my favorite item of the 3 items. So the next item is kind of themed with the cup. It's coffee. And it has quite a cute sticker on it. Grow Club Blend caramel flavored ground coffee. Drink it down to the dregs. It's medium roast with caramel flavor, I guess. So I feel very mixed on this. I guess I feel mainly negative about this. Because first of all, it's kind of small. This feels like maybe 4 cups of coffee. I don't know, maybe even less. And then it's gone. Unlike the mug, which you can reuse forever. And I like coffee. However, I've been trying not to drink too much of it lately because the acidity really makes me feel sick. So I very sparingly drink coffee or tea. I drink usually decaf coffee or tea. And what about people who don't drink coffee at all? I have a few friends who don't drink coffee or tea. So I feel like for them, this is a total waste. So yeah, I think when I was unboxing it, I first unboxed the mug and I was like, yes, this is awesome. And then like, this is the last thing I pulled out, and it was kind of a letdown. Oh, that's nice though. I haven't opened it yet, obviously, so I haven't smelled it, and maybe it'll be amazing coffee. However, I still just don't think it was necessarily worth it to have like a one-time use thing and a box of goodies, you know? I don't know. So then I'll show you the last thing. If I can find it in here. It's kind of small, so it's kind of hard to find. But it is a candle. A kind of a small candle, to be honest. All my candles are pretty much bigger than this. But I do like candles. I love a good candle. I do light them. Well, actually, I have a candle warmer that I like to use. So maybe I'll use it in that. It has a very strong smell. I can already smell it without even taking the lid off. And yeah, it's insanely sweet smelling. I like that, but you might not like that, you know, and I've already heard some people think it smells way too sweet and they don't like that, which is disappointing. And again, it's a limited time use thing. Eventually this will be gone. So the smell is Cooper waffles. Again, very cute that they did like in-universe branding. If you read the books, you know the waffles are a big kind of thing to eat in the world, and one character in particular loves the waffles. Very relatable. I have since been to the Netherlands and Belgium, and I cannot stop eating the waffles, so I love Nina. It does have like a wood wick. I think those are the ones that like crackle, so I guess I'll light it. I've never had one of those. treats every now and then. Let me know what you think, if you think it was worth it. I'd love to know. Yep, and on the card it does tell you like who they collaborated with to make these items. The Ketterdam Coffee Company souvenir mug, the Cooper and Waffle Scandal, and the Crow Club ground coffee blend. They also credit all the artists that they collaborated with on the books, which is very nice because I've since gone and like checked out their socials because I like some of the artwork. Let's get into the books now. That's definitely the best part. So we have 2 books. The Six of Crows, which is the first book I've already shown you, and the second book, a little bit thicker, a little bit longer, Crooked Kingdom. And Crooked Kingdom has the better edges, in my opinion. It's actual crows. The first one is very ice court themed. They look like this together. And the back of Crooked Kingdom says, "We never stop fighting." They both have ribbon bookmarks built in. Very cute. And as I said, Leigh Bardugo herself signed the first book. I'm a huge fan of hers, so this is very, very exciting to me. Yeah, let me see if I can like hold him up a little closer. Like I said, I'm gonna do a close-up in a second though. I'm trying to make sure they're in focus. This is hard to do. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna stop and we're gonna do close-ups. Here we are. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. And it's very shiny and reflective, as you can see. Six of Crows has got like silver accents, and Crooked Kingdom has like gold accents. So as I said, on the back it says "No mourners, no funerals." And this one is very dear home, ice court, Fjorda themed with the wolf and the like. There's also a crow, and I guess silver the theme. And the bottom is the same as the top. When you open it up, well, there's the signature, but we have this really beautiful end paper design with very shiny silvery accents. I'll show you the dust jacket in a bit. And this is the front. A traveler's companion, dear home, and the ice court. Yeah, it's an interesting choice to go so ice court themed, but I don't mind it. I guess it is a major plot point of the books. That's not too spoilery. On the side, I love how big and beautiful Six of Crows and the snowflake kind of theme. And on the back, it says London, Ulstrom, and Kendisholm Isen Bestrom. I don't know how to pronounce that. The water hears and understands, the ice does not forgive. Let's open it up. So I'll show you once again the signature. And it's not a digital signature, it's a real one. And there's also an author letter from Leigh. Oh, she's written "No mourners" at the bottom. Oh, it's just so nice. I haven't actually read that through yet. And there's lots of maps and all that. Now I'm going to show you the artwork, and I'm going to give you a warning ahead of time that the artwork ranges from mildly spoilery to very spoilery. So at the beginning, this isn't too spoilery. We kind of have all the characters seated together, and the artwork is placed in the book where this scene would take place. So if you haven't read the books and you don't want spoilers, I would maybe skip to the reading. I would skip the rest of this segment to my reading timestamp, because there will be some intense spoilers. This is one of my favorite artwork pieces. I love them. Sorry, I can't do the Gen Z heart, so that's the best. Actually, you may have already seen it in the thumbnail because it's so gorgeous. But this one is my favorite. Oh, I forgot to show it next. Okay. Well, there's maps, and there's different maps, and there's one of Ketterdam this time. More by Le Bardugo. And it's the same in the back. Okay, this is the front. Ketterdam, a tourist guide. How cute is this? I love it. Yeah, I know I have a cut on my finger, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed. I did that myself. I accidentally punched my bookshelf, and yeah, you don't want to know. I don't know how I managed to do that. Love the way it says Crooked Kingdom with the spade and the club and the back. When you can't beat the odds, change the game. It's so good. Yeah, I think this book is my favorite in terms of the design. Overall design. Now we're gonna look at the artwork, and I'm gonna warn you one last time. Extreme spoiler warning. So please look away, close your eyes, or skip forward a few minutes to where I start reading. Our first artwork is Inej, doing her thing. Love her. What a queen. And I really love how she's depicted here. She is stunning. Absolutely gorgeous. The next one is tied for my favorite with the Westboro. I really don't know which one I prefer. The Inej or the Whisper. But look at them. Oh, this picture is everything. I love it. Oh, it's so good. This is a great scene. And then the last artwork, once again, spoiler warning, please skip ahead if you haven't read Crooked Kingdom. Honestly, I am offended that they included this artwork. How dare they make me remember this scene? I'm not even going to talk about it, because if you just closed your eyes, I don't want to describe what's happening. It's well done, but how dare you? How dare you? Okay, the spoiler bit is over. And here's the inside of the dust jacket. I like this art style, it's very cute. I love that we get a combination of more realistic with more stylized artwork. Overall, this is absolutely a collector's piece that I will treasure forever, and I'm so happy and I feel so privileged to be able to own them. Look at it. Not only stay on my shelves, but I'm going to read them time and time again. I have a lot of books to read right now, but when I have some time, I want to do a proper reread of both of them. Here they are together. Both the cover, or the artwork on the edges. Very pretty. And then if you put them like side to side by the spines, although it would go the other way around, there we go. They look really good together in the spines. I haven't seen how they look together without the dust jacket. But okay, let's get to reading. Alrighty, my dears. Are you ready for me to read to you? Welcome, those of you who skipped straight to this part. If you have never heard or read Six of Crows before, or if you've read it multiple times, welcome. If you haven't read, I do recommend you go check it out for yourself. Maybe this will pique your interest. Now, this is a young adult series. However, there is some slightly more adult language. And it has like tense themes. I guess if it were like a TV show or a movie, you'd give it like a PG-13 rating. There's a lot of maps in the beginning. I'm going through all the maps. Six of Crows by Le Bardugo. And then at the beginning it has like a little list of the Grisha. If you're unfamiliar with the Grishaverse, the Grisha are the magic users in this world, and they come in different forms. The corporealky, the etherealky, and the materialky. It's like people who can manipulate the body, people who can manipulate the elements, and people who can manipulate like man-made elements, like alloys or just metals maybe. And I think it's very cool. You kind of have to know that because some of the characters are... Look, I have a cat hair stuck on my lipstick. Did I just mess it up? I don't know. Anyway. So this is why it's sometimes recommended you read Shadow and Bone first, because it sets the world up and this magical sort of system. You learn about the magic, but it's not required reading, I think. The events and the characters of Shadow and Bone are referenced in passing, but you don't really 100% need to know what's going on. You can kind of infer from context. This has a lot of Dutch sounding names, and I'm not necessarily very good at pronouncing them, so I'm sorry if I pronounce some names or words wrong, but I'm going to do my best. We're going to read the first 2 chapters. This is part 1, Shadow Business. Every chapter follows a different character POV, and this first one is Joost. Joost had 2 problems: the moon and his mustache. He was supposed to be making his rounds at the RØDE house, but for the last 15 minutes he'd been hovering around the southeast wall of the gardens, trying to think of something clever and romantic to say to Anya. If only Anya's eyes were blue like the sea or green like an emerald. Instead, her eyes were brown, lovely, dreamy, melted chocolate brown, rabbit fur brown. Just tell her she's got skin like moonlight, his friend Peter had said. Girls love that. A perfect solution, but the Ketterdam weather was not cooperating. There'd been no breeze off the harbor that day, and a grey milk fog had reefed the city's canals and crooked alleys in damp. Even here among the mansions of the Geldstraat, the air hung thick with the smell of fish and bilge water, and smoke from the refineries on the city's outer islands had smeared the night sky in a briny haze. The full moon looked less like a jewel than a yellowy blister in need of lancing. Maybe he could compliment Anya's laugh, except he never heard her laugh. He wasn't very good with jokes. Joost glanced at his reflection in one of the glass panels set into the double doors that led from the house to the side garden. His mother was right. Even in his new uniform, he still looked like a baby. Gently, he brushed his finger along his upper lip. If only his mustache would come in. It definitely felt thicker than yesterday. He'd been a guard in the Stadwatch less than 6 weeks, and it wasn't nearly as exciting as he'd hoped. He thought he'd be running down thieves in the barrel, or patrolling the harbors, getting first look at cargo coming in on the docks. But ever since the assassination of that ambassador at the town hall, the Merchant Council's been grumbling about security, so where was he? Stuck walking in circles at some lucky merchant's house. Not just any merchant, though. Councilman RØDE was about as high placed in Ketterdam government as a man could be, the kind of man who could make a career. Joost adjusted the set of his coat and rifle and patted the weighted baton at his hip. Maybe RØDE would take a liking to him. Sharp-eyed and quick with a cudgel, RØDE would say. That fellow deserves a promotion. Sergeant Joost van Poel, he whispered, savoring the sound of the words. Captain Joost van Poel. Stop gawking at yourself. Joost whirled, cheeks going hot, as Henk and Rutger strode into the side garden. They were both older, bigger, and broader of shoulder than Joost, and they were house guards, private servants of Councilman RØDE. That meant they wore his pale green livery, carried fancy rifles from Novi Zem, and never let Joost forget he was a lowly grunt from the city watch. Petting that bit of fuzz isn't going to make it grow any faster, Rutger said with a loud laugh. Joost tried to summon some dignity. I need to finish my rounds. Rutger elbowed Henk.
That means he's gonna go stick his head in the Grisha workshop to get a look at his girl. Oh, Anya, won't you use your Grisha magic to make my mustache grow? Hank mocked. Joost turned on his heel, cheeks burning, and strode down the eastern side of the house. They'd been teasing him ever since he arrived. If it hadn't been for Anya, he probably would have pleaded with his captain for a reassignment. He and Anya only ever exchanged a few words on his rounds, but she was always the best part of his night. And he had to admit, he liked RØDE's house, too. The few peeks he'd managed through the windows. RØDE had one of the grandest mansions on the Gildstraat, floor set with gleaming squares of black and white stone, shining dark wood walls lit by blown glass chandeliers that floated like jellyfish near the coffered ceilings. Sometimes Joost liked to pretend that it was his house, that he was a rich merchant just out for a stroll through his fine garden. Before he rounded the corner, Joost took a deep breath. Anya, your eyes are brown like tree bark? He'd think of something. He was better off being spontaneous anyway. He was surprised to see the glass panel doors to the Grisha workshop open. More than the hand-painted blue tiles in the kitchen or the mantels laden with potted tulips, this workshop was a testimony to RØDE's wealth. Grisha indentures didn't come cheap, and RØDE had 3 of them. But Yuri wasn't seated at the long work table, and Anya was nowhere to be seen. Only Redvenko was there, sprawled on a chair in dark blue robes, eyes shut, a book shut on his chest. Joost hovered in the doorway, then cleared his throat. These doors should be shut and locked at night. House is like a furnace, Redvenko drawled without opening his eyes, his Ravkin accent thick and rolling. Tell RØDE I've stopped sweating. I close doors. Redvenko was a squalor, older than the other Grisha indentures, his hair shot through with silver. There were rumors he'd fought for the losing side in Ravka's civil war, and had fled to Kerch after the fighting. I'd be happy to present your complaints to Councilman RØDE, Joost lied. The house was always overheated, as if RØDE was under obligation to burn coal, but Joost wasn't going to be the one to mention it. Until then, you bring news of Yuri? Redvenko interrupted, finally opening his heavily hooded eyes. Joost glanced uneasily at the bowls of red grapes and heaps of burgundy velvet on the work table. Yuri had been working on bleeding color from the fruit into curtains for Mistress RØDE, but he'd fallen badly ill a few days ago, and Joost hadn't seen him since. Dust had begun to gather on the velvet, and the grapes were going bad. I haven't heard anything. Of course you hear nothing. Too busy strutting about in stupid purple uniform. What was wrong with his uniform? And why did Redvenko even have to be here? He was RØDE's personal squalor, and often traveled with the merchant's most precious cargo, guaranteeing favorable winds to bring the ship safely and quickly to harbor. Why couldn't he be away at sea now? I think Yuri may be quarantined. So helpful, Redvenko said with a sneer. You can stop craning neck like hopeful goose, he said. Anya's gone. Joost felt his face heat again. Where's she? He asked, trying to sound authoritative. She should be in after dark. 1 hour ago, all it takes her. Seems night he came for Yuri. What do you mean he came for Yuri? Yuri fell ill. RØDE comes for Yuri. Yuri comes back sick. 2 days later, Yuri vanishes for good. Now Anya. For good? Maybe there was an emergency. If someone needed to be healed. First Yuri, now Anya. I will be next, and no one will notice except the poor little officer Joost. Go now. If Councilman RØDE, Redvenko raised an arm, and a gust of air slammed Joost backward. Joost scrambled to keep his footing, grabbing for the door frame. I said now. Redvenko etched a circle in the air, and the door slammed shut. Joost let go just in time to avoid having his fingers smashed and toppled into the side garden. He got to his feet as quickly as he could, wiping muck from his uniform, shame squirming in his belly. One of the glass panes in the door had cracked from the force. Through it, he saw the squalor smirking. That's counting against your indenture, Joost said, pointing to the ruined pane. He hated how small and petty his voice sounded. Redvenko waved his hand, and the doors trembled on their hinges. Without meaning to, Joost took a step back. "Go make your rounds, little watchdog," Redvenko called. "That went well," snickered Rutger, leaning against the garden wall. How long had he been standing there? "Don't you have something better to do than to follow me around?" Joost asked. "All guards to report to the boathouse, even you. Or are you too busy making friends?" I was asking him to shut the door. Rutger shook his head. "You don't ask, you tell. They're servants, not honored guests." Joost fell into step beside him, inside still churning of humiliation. The worst part was that Rutger was right. Redvenko had no business talking to him that way. But what was Joost supposed to do? Even if he'd had the courage to get into a fight with a squaller, it'd be like brawling with an expensive vase. The Grisha weren't just servants, they were Hoda's treasured possessions. What had Redvenko meant about Yuri and Anya being taken, anyway? Had he been covering for Anya? Grisha indentures were kept to the house, for good reason. To walk the streets without protection was to risk getting plucked up by a slaver and never seen again. Maybe she's meeting someone, Joost speculated miserably. His thoughts were interrupted by the blaze of light and activity down by the boathouse that faced the canal. Across the water he could see other fine merchant houses, tall and slender, the tidy gables of their rooftops making a dark silhouette against the night sky, their gardens and boathouses lit by glowing lanterns. A few weeks before, Joost had been told that Hoda's boathouse would be undergoing improvements and to strike it from his rounds. But when he and Rutger entered, he saw no paint or scaffolding. The gondolas and oars had been pushed up against the walls. The other house guards were there in their sea green livery, and Joost recognized 2 Stadwatch guards in purple. But most of the interior was taken up by a huge box, a kind of freestanding cell that looked like it was made from reinforced steel, its seams thick with rivets, a huge window embedded in one of its walls. The glass had a wavy bent, and through it Joost could see a girl seated at a table, clutching her red silks tight around her. Behind her, a Stadwatch guard stood at attention. Anya, Joost realized with a start. Her brown eyes were wide and frightened, her skin pale. The little boy sitting across from her looked doubly terrified. His hair was sleep mussed, and his legs dangled from the chair, kicking nervously at the air. "Why all the guards?" asked Joost. There had to be more than 10 of them crowded into the boathouse. Councilman Hoda was there too, along with a merchant Joost didn't know, both of them dressed in mercer black. Joost stood up straighter when he saw they were talking to the captain of the Stadwatch. He hoped he'd gotten all the garden mud off his uniform. "What is this?" Rutger shrugged. "Who cares? It's a break in the routine." Joost looked back through the glass. Anya was staring out at him, her gaze unfocused. The day he'd arrived at Hoda House, she'd healed a bruise on his cheek. It had been nothing, the yellow-green remnants of a crack he'd taken to the face during a training exercise. But apparently Hoda caught sight of it and didn't like his guards looking that way, like thugs. Joost had been sent to the Grisha workshop, and Anya had sat him down in a bright square of late winter sunlight. Her cool fingers had passed over his skin, and though the itch had been terrible, bare seconds later it was as if the bruise had never been. When Joost thanked her, Anya smiled, and Joost was lost. He knew his cause was hopeless. Even if she'd had any interest in him, he could never afford to buy her indenture from Hoda, and she would never marry unless Hoda decreed it. But it hadn't stopped him from dropping by to say hello, or to bring her little gifts. She'd liked the map of Kerch best. A whimsical drawing of their island nation, surrounded by mermaids swimming in the true sea, and ships blown along by winds depicted as fat-cheeked men. It was a cheap souvenir, the kind tourists bought along East Dave, but it had seemed to please her. Now he risked raising a hand in greeting. Anya showed no reaction. "She can't see you, moron," laughed Rutger. "The class is mirrored on the other side." Jost's cheeks pinked. How was I to know that? Open your eyes and pay attention for once. First Yuri, now Anya. Why do they need a Grisha healer? Is that boy injured? He looks fine to me. The captain and Hoda seemed to reach some kind of agreement. Through the glass, Joost saw Hoda enter the cell and give the boy an encouraging pat. There must have been vents in the cell because he heard Hoda say, "Be a brave lad, and there's a few Kruger in it for you." Then he grabbed Anya's chin with a liver-spotted hand. She tensed, and Joost's gut tightened. Hoda gave Anya's head a little shake. "Do as you're told, and this will soon be over, yeah?" She gave a small, tight smile. "Of course, Uncle." "Uncle?" Hoda whispered a few words to the guard behind Anya, then stepped out. The door shut with a loud clang, and Hoda slid a heavy lock into place. Hoda and the other merchant took positions almost directly in front of Joost and Rutger. The merchant Joost didn't know said, You sure this is wise? This girl is a Korporalnik. After what happened to your fabricator, if it was Ritvenko, I'd be worried. But Anya has a sweet disposition. She's a healer, not prone to aggression." "And you've lowered the dose?" "Yes, but we're agreed that if we have the same results as the fabricator, the council will compensate me. I can't be asked to bear that expense." When the merchant nodded, Hoda signaled to the captain. "Proceed." "The same results as the fabricator?" Ritvenko claimed Yuri had vanished. Was that what he'd meant? "Sergeant," said the captain, "are you ready?" The guard inside the cell replied, "Yes, sir." He drew a knife. Joost swallowed hard. "First test," said the captain. The guard bent forward and told the boy to roll up his sleeve. The boy obeyed and stuck out his arm, popping the thumb of the other hand into his mouth. Too old for that, thought Joost. But the boy must be very scared. Joost had slept with a sock bear until he was nearly 14, a fact his older brothers had mocked mercilessly. "This will sting just a bit," said the guard. The boy kept his thumb in his mouth and nodded, eyes round. "This really isn't necessary," said Anya. "Quiet, please," said Hoda. The guard gave the boy a pat, then slashed a bright red cut across his forearm. The boy started crying immediately. Anya tried to rise from her chair, but the guard placed a stern hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Sergeant," said Hoda. "Let her heal him." Anya leaned forward, taking the boy's hand gently. "Shh," she said softly. "Let me help." "Will it hurt?" The boy gulped. She smiled. "Not at all. Just a little itch. Try to hold still for me." Joost found himself leaning closer. He'd never actually seen Anya heal someone. Anya removed a handkerchief from her sleeve and wiped away the excess blood. Then her fingers brushed carefully over the boy's wound. Joost watched in astonishment as the skin slowly seemed to reform and knit together. A few minutes later, the boy grinned and held out his arm. It looked a bit red, but otherwise smooth and unmarked. Was that magic? Anya tapped him on the nose. "Of a sort. The same magic your own body works when given time and a bit of a bandage." The boy looked almost disappointed. Good, Hoda said impatiently. "Now the param." Joost frowned. He'd never heard that word. The captain signaled to the sergeant. "Second sequence. Put out your arm again," the sergeant said to the boy once again. The boy shook his head. "I don't like that part." "Do it." The boy's lower lip quivered, but he put out his arm. The guard cut him once more. Then he placed a small wax paper envelope on the table in front of Anya. "Swallow the contents of that packet," Hoda instructed Anya. "What is it?" she asked, voice trembling. "That isn't your concern." "What is it?" she repeated. "It's not going to kill you. We're going to ask you to perform some simple tasks to judge the drug's effect. The sergeant is there to make sure you do only what you're told and no more. Understood?" Her jaw set, but she nodded. "No one will harm you," said Hoda. "But remember, if you hurt the sergeant, you will have no way out of that cell. The doors are locked from the outside." "What is that?" whispered Joost. "Don't know," said Rutger. "What do you know?" he muttered. "Enough to keep my trap shut." Joost scowled. With shaking hands, Inej lifted the little wax envelope and opened the flap. "Go on," said RØDE. She tipped her head back and swallowed the powder. For a moment she sat, waiting, lips pressed together. "Is it just RØDE?" she asked hopefully. Joost found himself hoping too. RØDE was nothing to fear, a stimulant everyone in the Stadwatch chewed to stay awake on late watches. "What does it taste like?" RØDE asked. Like RØDE, but sweeter." Inej inhaled sharply. Her hands seized the table, her pupils dilating enough that her eyes looked nearly black. "Oh," she said, sighing. It was nearly a purr. The guard tightened his grip on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" She stared at the mirror and smiled. Her tongue peeked through her white teeth, stained like rust. Joost felt suddenly cold. "Just as it was with the fabricator," murmured the merchant. "Heal the boy," RØDE commanded. She waved her hand through the air, the gesture almost dismissive, and the cut on the boy's arm sealed instantly. The blood lifted briefly from his skin in droplets of red, and then vanished. His skin looked perfectly smooth, all trace of blood or redness gone. The boy beamed. That was definitely magic. "It feels like magic," Inej said, with that same eerie smile. "She didn't touch him," marveled the captain. "Inej," said RØDE, "listen closely. We're going to tell the guard to perform the next test now." Hummed Inej. "Sergeant," said RØDE, "cut off the boy's thumb." The boy howled and started to cry again. He shoved his hands beneath his legs to protect them. "I should stop this," Joost thought. "I should find a way to protect her, both of them." But what then? He was a nobody, new to the Stadwatch, new to this house. Besides, he discovered in a burst of shame, "I want to keep my job." Inej merely smiled and tilted her head back so she was looking at the sergeant. "Shoot the glass." "What did she say?" asked the merchant. "Sergeant," the captain barked out. "Shoot the glass," Inej repeated. The sergeant's face went slack. He cocked his head to one side, as if listening to a distant melody, then unslung his rifle and aimed at the observation window. "Get down!" someone yelled. Joost threw himself to the ground, covering his head as the rapid hammer of gunfire filled his ears, and bits of glass rained down on his hands and back. His thoughts were a panicked clamor. His mind tried to deny it, but he knew what he'd just seen. Inej had commanded the sergeant to shoot the glass. She'd made him do it. But that couldn't be. Grisha Corporalki specialized in the human body. They could stop your heart, slow your breathing, snap your bones. They couldn't get inside your head. For a moment there was silence. Then Joost was on his feet with everyone else reaching for his rifle. RØDE and the captain shouted at the same time, "Subdue her! Shoot her!" "Do you know how much money she's worth?" RØDE retorted. "Someone restrain her! Do not shoot!" Inej raised her hands, red sleeves spread wide. "Wait," she said. Joost's panic vanished. He knew he'd been frightened, but his fear was a distant thing. He was filled with expectation. He wasn't sure what was coming or when, only that it would arrive and that it was essential he'd be ready to meet it. It might be good or bad. He didn't really care. His heart was free of worry and desire. He longed for nothing, wanted for nothing, his mind silent, his breath steady. He only needed to wait. He saw Inej rise and pick up the little boy. He heard her crooning tenderly to him some Ravkin lullaby. "Open the door and come in, RØDE," she said. Joost heard the words, understood them, forgot them. RØDE walked to the door and slid the bolt free. He entered the steel cell. "Do as you're told, and this will soon be over, yeah?" Inej murmured with a smile. Her eyes were black and bottomless pools. Her skin was alight, glowing, incandescent. A thought flickered through Joost's mind. Beautiful as the moon. Anya shifted the boy's weight in her arms. "Don't look," she murmured against his hair. "Now," she said to Hoda, "pick up the knife." Chapter 2, Inej. Cass Brecker didn't need a reason. Those were the words whispered on the streets of Ketterdam, in the taverns and coffee houses, in the dark and bleeding alleys of the pleasure district known as the Barrel. The boy they called Dirty Hands didn't need a reason any more than he needed permission to break a leg, sever an alliance, or change a man's fortunes with the turn of a card. Of course they were wrong, Inej considered as she crossed the bridge over the black waters of the Björkskanal to the mid-deserted main square that fronted the exchange. Every act of violence was deliberate, and every favor came with enough strings attached to stage a puppet show. Cass always had his reasons, and Inej could just never be sure they were good ones, especially tonight. Inej checked her knives, silently recited their names, as she always did when she thought there might be trouble. It was a practical habit, but a comfort too. The blades were her companions. She liked knowing they were ready for whatever the night might bring. She saw Cass and the others gathered near the great stone arch that marked the eastern entrance to the exchange. 3 words had been carved into the rock above them. Enjent, Vorhent, Almhent. Industry, integrity, prosperity. She kept close to the shuttered storefronts that lined the square, avoiding the pockets of flickering gaslight cast by the street lamps. As she moved, she inventoried the crew Cass had brought with him. Dirks, Rotti, Muzzin, and Keeg, Annika, and Pim, and his chosen seconds for tonight's parley, Jesper and Big Bolliger. They jostled and bumped one another, laughing, stamping their feet against the cold snap that had surprised the city this week, the last gasp of winter before spring began in earnest. They were all bruisers and brawlers, culled from the youngest members of the dregs, the people Cass trusted most. Inej noted the glint of knives tucked into their belts, lead pipes, weighted chains, axe handles studded with rusty nails, and here and there the oily gleam of a gun barrel. She slipped silently into their ranks, scanning the shadows near the exchange for signs of black-tip spies. 3 ships, Jesper was saying. The shoe sent them. They were just sitting in the first harbor, cannons out, red flags flying, stuffed to the sails with gold. Big Bolliger gave a low whistle. Would have liked to see that. Would have liked to steal that, Jesper replied. Half the merchant council was down there flapping and squawking, trying to figure out what to do. Don't they want the shoe paying their debts? Big Bolliger asked. Cass shook his head, dark hair glinting in the lamplight. He was a collection of hard lines and tailored edges, sharp jaw, lean build, wool coat snug across his shoulders. Yes and no, he said in a rock-salt rasp. It's always good to have a country in debt to you. Makes for friendlier negotiations. Maybe the shoe are done being friendly, said Jesper. They didn't have to send all that treasure at once. You think they stuck that trade ambassador? Cass's eyes found Inej unerringly in the crowd. Ketterdam had been buzzing about the assassination of the ambassador for weeks. It had nearly destroyed Kirch's many relations and sent the merchant council into an uproar. The Zemeni blamed the Kirch. The Kirch suspected the shoe. Cass didn't care who was responsible. The murder fascinated him because he couldn't figure out how it had been accomplished. In one of the busiest corridors of the Stadthall, in full view of more than a dozen government officials, the Zemeni trade ambassador had stepped into a washroom. No one else had entered or left, but when his aide knocked on the door a few minutes later, there had been no answer. When they'd broken down the door, they'd found the ambassador, face down on the white tiles, a knife in his back, the sink still running. Cass had sent Inej to investigate the premises after hours. The washroom had no other entrance, no windows or vents, and even Inej hadn't mastered the art of squeezing herself through the plumbing. Yet the Zemeni ambassador was dead. Kaz hated a puzzle he couldn't solve, and he and Inej had concocted 100 theories to account for the murder, none of which satisfied. But they had more pressing problems tonight. She saw him signal to Jesper and Big Bolliger to divest themselves of weapons. Street law dictated that for a parley of this kind, each lieutenant be seconded by 2 of his foot soldiers, and they all be unarmed. Parley. That word felt like a deception. Strangely prim and antique. No matter what street law decreed, this night smelled like violence. Go on, give those guns over, Derek said to Jesper. With a great sigh, Jesper removed the gun belt at his hips. She had to admit, he looked less himself without them. The Zemeni sharpshooter was long-limbed, brown-skinned, constantly in motion. He pressed his lips to the pearl handles of his prized revolvers, bestowing each with a mournful kiss. Take good care of my babies, Jesper said as he handed them over to Durex. If I see a single scratch on those, I'll spell forgive me on your chest in bullet holes. You wouldn't waste the ammo. And he'd be dead halfway through forgive, Big Bolliger said, as he dropped a hatchet, a switchblade, and his preferred weapon, a thick chain weighted with a heavy padlock, into Rotty's expectant hands. Jesper rolled his eyes. It's about sending a message. What's the point of a dead guy with Thorg written on his chest? Compromise, Cass says. I'm sorry does the trick and uses fewer bullets. Derek's laughed, but Inej noted that he cradled Jesper's revolvers very gently. What about that? Jesper asked, gesturing to Kaz's walking stick. Kaz's laugh was low and humorless. Who'd deny a poor cripple his cane? If the cripple is you, then any man with sense. Then it's a good thing tonight we're meeting Gilles. Kaz drew a watch from his vest pocket. It's almost midnight. Inej turned her gaze to the exchange. It is little more than a large rectangular courtyard surrounded by warehouses and shipping offices. But during the day it was the heart of Ketterdam, bustling with wealthy merchants, buying and selling shares in the trade voyages that passed the city's ports. Now it was nearly 12 bells, and the exchange was deserted, but for the guards who patrolled the perimeter and the rooftop. They'd been bribed to look the other way during tonight's parley. The exchange is one of the few remaining parts of the city that hadn't been divvied up and claimed in the ceaseless skirmishes between Ketterdam's rival gangs. It was supposed to be neutral territory, but it didn't feel neutral to Inej. It felt like the hush of the woods before the snare yanks tight and the rabbit starts to scream. It felt like a trap. This is a mistake, she said. Big Bolliger startled. He hadn't known she was standing there. Inej heard the name the dregs preferred for her whispered among their ranks. The Wraith. Gilles is up to something. Of course he is, said Cass. His voice had the rough, abraded texture of stone against stone. Inej always wondered if he sounded that way as a little boy. If he'd ever been a little boy. Then why come here tonight? Because this is the way Per Haskell wants it. Old man, old ways, Inej thought, but didn't say, and she suspected the other dregs were thinking the same thing. He's going to get us all killed, she said. Jesper stretched his long arms overhead and grinned, his teeth white against his dark skin. He had yet to give up his rifle, and the silhouette of it across his back made him resemble a gawky, long-limbed bird. Statistically, he'll probably only get some of us killed. It's not something to joke about, she replied. The look Kaz cast her was amused. She knew how she sounded. Stern, fussy, like an old crone making dire pronouncements from her porch. She didn't like it, but she also knew she was right. Besides, old women must know something, or they wouldn't live to gather wrinkles and yell from their front stoops. Jesper isn't making a joke, Inej, said Kaz. He's figuring the odds. Big Bolliger cracked his huge knuckles. Well, I've got lager and a skillet of eggs waiting for me at the coop room, so I can't be the one to die tonight. Care to place a wager? Jesper asked. I'm not going to bet on my own death. Kaz flipped his hat onto his head and ran his gloved fingers along the brim in a quick salute. Why not, Bolliger? We do it every day. He was right. Inej's debt to Per Haskell meant she gambled her life every time she took on a new job or assignment, every time she left her room with the slat. Tonight was no different. Kaz struck his walking stick against the cobblestones as the bells from the Church of Barter began to chime. The group fell silent. The time for talk was done. "Giles isn't smart, but he's just bright enough to be trouble," said Kaz. "No matter what you hear, you don't join the fray unless I give the command. Stay sharp." And he gave Inej a brief nod. "And stay hidden." "No mourners," Jesper said as he tossed his rifle to Roddy. "No funerals," the rest of the dregs murmured in reply. Among them, it passed for good luck. Before Inej could melt into the shadows, Kaz tapped her arm with his crow's head cane. "Keep a watch on the rooftop guards. Giles may have them in his pocket." Then Inej began, but Kaz was already gone. Inej threw up her hands in frustration. She had 100 questions, but as usual, Kaz was keeping a stranglehold on the answers. She jogged toward the canal-facing wall of the exchange. Only the lieutenants and their seconds were allowed to enter during the parley, but just in case the black tips got any ideas, the other dregs would be waiting right outside the eastern arch with weapons at the ready. She knew Giles would have his crew of heavily armed black tips gathered at the western entrance. Inej should find her own way in. The rules of fair play among the gangs were from Per Haskell's time. Besides, she was the Wraith. The only law that applied to her was gravity, and some days she defied that too. The lower level of the exchange was dedicated to windowless warehouses, so Inej located a drain pipe to shinny up. Something made her hesitate before she wrapped her hand around it. She drew a bone light from her pocket and gave it a shake, casting a pale green glow over the pipe. It was slick with oil. She followed the wall, seeking another option, and found a stone cornice bearing a statue of Kirch's 3 flying fishes within reach. She stood on her toes and tentatively felt along the top of the cornice. It had been covered in ground glass. "I am expected," she thought with grim pleasure. She had joined up with the dregs less than 2 years ago, just days after her 15th birthday. It had been a matter of survival, but it gratified her to know that, in such short time, she had become someone to take precautions against. Though the black tips thought tricks like this would keep the Wraith from her goal, they were sadly mistaken. She drew 2 climbing spikes from the pocket of her quilted vest and wedged first one, then the other between the bricks of the wall as she hoisted herself higher, her questing feet finding the smallest holes and ridges in the stone. As a child learning the high wire, she had gone barefoot, but the streets of Ketterdam were too cold and wet for that. After a few bad spills, she'd paid a Grisha fabricator working in secret out of a gin shop on the Weinstraat to make her a pair of leather slippers with nibbly rubber soles. They were perfectly fitted to her feet and gripped any surface with surety. On the second story of the exchange, she hoisted herself onto a window ledge, just wide enough to perch on. Kaz had done his best to teach her, but she didn't quite have his way with breaking and entering, and it took her a few tries to finesse the lock. Finally, she heard a satisfying click, and the window swung open on a deserted office, its walls covered in maps marked with trade routes, and chalkboards listing share prices and the names of ships. She ducked inside, refastened the latch, and picked her way past the empty desks with their neat stacks and orders and tallies. She crossed to a slender set of doors and stepped onto a balcony that overlooked the central courtyard of the exchange. Each of the shipping offices had one. From here, callers announced new voyages and arrivals of inventory, or hung the black flag that indicated that a ship had been lost at sea with all its cargo. The floor of the exchange would erupt into a flurry of trades, runners would spread the word throughout the city, and the price of goods, futures, and shares in outgoing voyages would rise or fall. But tonight all was silence. A wind came in off the harbor, bringing the smell of the sea, ruffling the stray hairs that had escaped the braided coil at the nape of Inej's neck. Down in the square she saw the sway of lamplight, and heard the thump of Kaz's cane on the stones as he and his seconds made their way across the square. On the opposite side, she glimpsed another set of lanterns heading toward them. The black tips had arrived. Inej raised her hood. She pulled herself onto the railing and leapt soundlessly to the neighboring balcony, then the next, tracking Kaz and the others around the square, staying as close as she could. His dark coat rippled in the salt breeze, his limp more pronounced tonight, as it always was when the weather turned cold. She could hear Jesper keeping up a lively stream of conversation, and Big Bolliger's low, rumbling chuckle. As she drew nearer to the other side of the square, Inej saw that Giels had chosen to bring Elsinger and Omen, exactly as she had predicted. Inej knew the strengths and weaknesses of every member of the Black Tips, not to mention Harley's Pointers, the Liddies, the Razor Gulls, the Dime Lions, and every other gang working the streets of Ketterdam. It was her job to know that Giels trusted Elsinger because they'd come up through the ranks of the Black Tips together, and because Elsinger was built like a stack of boulders, nearly 7 feet tall, dense with muscle, his wide, mashed-in face jammed low on a neck thick as a pylon. She was suddenly glad Big Bolliger was with Kaz. That Kaz had chosen Jesper to be one of his seconds was no surprise. Twitchy as Jesper was, with or without his revolvers, he was at his best in a fight, and she knew he'd do anything for Kaz. She'd been less sure when Kaz had insisted on Big Bolliger as well. Big Ball was a bouncer at the Crow Club, perfectly suited to tossing out drunks and wasters, but too heavy on his feet to be much use when it came to a real tussle. Still, at least he was tall enough to look Elsinger in the eye. Inej didn't want to think too much on Giels' other second. Oomen made her nervous. He wasn't as physically intimidating as Elsinger. In fact, Oomen was made like a scarecrow. Not scrawny, but as if beneath his clothes his body had been put together at wrong angles. Word was he'd once crushed a man's skull with his bare hands, wiped his palms clean on his shirt front, and kept right on drinking. Inej tried to quiet the unease roiling through her, and listened as Giels and Kaz made small talk in the square, while their seconds patted each of them down to make sure no one was carrying. "Naughty," Jesper said as he removed a tiny knife from Elsinger's sleeve and tossed it across the square. "Clear," declared Big Bolliger as he finished patting down Giels and moved on to Oomen. Kaz and Giels discussed the weather, the suspicion that the coop room was serving watered-down drinks now that the rent had been raised, dancing around the real reason they'd come tonight. In theory, they would chat, make their apologies, agree to respect the boundaries of Fifth Harbor, then all head out to find a drink together. At least that's what Per Haskell had insisted. But what does Per Haskell know? Inej thought as she looked for the guards patrolling the roof above, trying to pick out their shapes in the dark. Haskell ran the dregs, but these days he preferred to sit in the warmth of his room, drinking lukewarm lager, building model ships, and telling long stories of his exploits to anyone who would listen. He seemed to think territory wars could be settled as they once had been, with a short scuffle and a friendly handshake. But every one of Inej's senses told her that was not how this was going to play out. Her father would have said the shadows were about their own business tonight. Something bad was going to happen here. Kaz stood with both gloved hands resting on the carved crow's head of his cane. He looked totally at ease, his narrow face obscured by the brim of his hat. Most gang members in the barrel loved flash, gaudy waistcoats, watch fobs studded with false gems, trousers in every print and pattern imaginable. Kaz was the exception, the picture of restraint, his dark vests and trousers simply cut and tailored along severe lines. At first she thought it was a matter of taste, but she'd come to understand that it was a joke he played on the upstanding merchers. He enjoyed looking like one of them. "I'm a businessman," he told her. "No more, no less. You're a thief, Kaz. Isn't that what I just said?" Now he looked like some kind of priest, come to preach to a group of circus performers. A young priest, she thought, with another pang of unease. Kaz had called Giels old and washed up, but he certainly didn't seem that way tonight. The Black Tips lieutenant might have wrinkles creasing the corner of his eyes, and burgeoning jowls beneath his sideburns, but he looked confident, experienced. Next to him, Kaz looked, 17. "Let's be fair, yeah? All we want is a bit more scrub," Giels said, tapping the mirrored buttons of his lime green waistcoat. "It's not fair for you to cull every spend-happy tourist stepping off a pleasure boat at Fifth Harbor." "Fifth Harbor's ours, Giels," Kaz replied. "The dregs get first crack at the pigeons who come looking for a little fun." Giels shook his head. You're a young one, Brecker, he said with an indulgent laugh. Maybe you don't understand how these things work. The harbors belong to the city, and we have as much right to them as anyone. We've all got a living to make. Technically, that was true, but Fifth Harbor had been useless and all but abandoned by the city when Kaz had taken it over. He'd had it dredged, and then built all the docks and the quay, and he'd had to mortgage the Crow Club to do it. Per Haskell had railed at him and called him a fool for the expense, but eventually he'd relented. According to Kaz, the old man's exact words had been, "Take all that rope and hang yourself." But the endeavor had paid for itself in less than a year. Now Fifth Harbor offered berths to merchant ships, as well as boats from all over the world carrying tourists and soldiers eager to see the sights and sample the pleasures of Ketterdam. The dregs got first dry at all of them, steering them and their wallets into brothels, taverns, and gambling dens owned by the gang. Fifth Harbor had made the old man very rich, and cemented the dregs as real players in the barrel in a way that not even the success of the Crow Club had. But with profit came unwanted attention. Geels and the Blacktips had been making trouble for the dregs all years, encroaching on Fifth Harbor, picking off pigeons that weren't rightfully theirs. "Fifth Harbor is ours," Kaz repeated. "It isn't up for negotiation. You're cutting into our traffic from the docks, and you intercepted a shipment of Jurda that should have docked 2 nights ago." Is it Jurda or Yurda? I never know. Don't know what you're talking about. I know it comes easy, Geels, but try not to play dumb with me. Geels took a step forward. Jesper and Big Pullinger tensed. "Quit flexing, boy," Geel said. "We all know the old man doesn't have the stomach for a real brawl." Kaz's laugh was dry as the rustle of dead leaves. "But I'm the one at your table, Geels, and I'm not here for a taste. You want a war? I'll make sure you eat your fill." "And what if you're not around, Brecker? Everyone knows you're the spine of Haskell's operation. Snap it, and the dregs collapse." Jesper snorted. "Stomach, spine. What's next, spleen?" "Shut it," Ooman snarled. The rules of parley dictated that only the lieutenants could speak once negotiations had begun. Jesper mouthed and elaborately pantomimed, locking his lips shut. "I'm fairly sure you're threatening me, Geels," Kaz said, "but I want to be certain before I decide what to do about it." "Sure of yourself, aren't you, Brecker?" "Myself and nothing else." Geels burst out laughing and elbowed Ooman. "Listen to this cocky little piece of crap. Brecker, you don't own these streets. Kids like you are fleas. A new crop of you turns up every few years to annoy your betters until a big dog decides to scratch. And let me tell you, I'm tired of the itch." He crossed his arms, pleasure rolling off him in smug waves. "What if I told you there are 2 guards with city-issue rifles pointed at you and your boys right now?" Inej's stomach dropped. Was that what Kaz had meant when she said Geels might have the guards in his pocket? Kaz glanced up at the roof. "Hiring city guards to do your killing? I'd say that's an expensive proposition for a gang like the Blacktips. I'm not sure I believe your coffers could support it." Inej climbed onto the railing and launched herself from the safety of the balcony, heading for the roof. If they survived the night, she was going to kill Kaz. There were always 2 guards from the Stadwatch posted on the roof of the exchange. A few Kruger from the Dregs and the Blacktips had ensured they wouldn't interfere with the parley, a common enough transaction. The Geel was implying something very different. Had he really managed to bribe city guards to play sniper for him? If so, the Dregs' odds of surviving this night just dwindled to a knife's point. Like most of the buildings in Ketterdam, the exchange had a sharply gabled roof to keep off heavy rain, so the guards patrolled the rooftop via a narrow walkway that overlooked the courtyard. Inej ignored it. It was easier going but would leave her too exposed. Instead, she scaled halfway up the slick roof tiles and started crawling, her body tilted at a precarious angle, moving like a spider as she kept one eye on the guard's walkway and one ear on the conversation below. Maybe Geels was bluffing. Or maybe 2 guards were hunched over the railing right now with Kaz or Jesper or Big Pullinger in their sights. "Took some doing," Geels admitted. "We're a small operation right now and city guards don't come cheap, but it'll be worth it for the prize." "That being me, that being you. I'm flattered. The dregs won't last a week without you." I'd give them a month on sheer momentum. The thought rattled noisily around in Inej's head. If Kaz was gone, would I stay? Or would I skip out on my debt? Take my chances with Per Haskell's enforcers? If she didn't move faster, she might well find out. Smug little slum rat, Giles laughed. I can't wait to wipe that look off your face. So do it, Kaz said. Inej risked a look down. His voice had changed, all humor gone. Should I have them put a bullet in your good leg, Brecker? Where are the guards? Inej thought, picking up her pace. She ran across the steep pitch of the gable. The exchange stretched nearly the length of the city block. There was too much territory to cover. Stop talking, Giles. Tell them to shoot. Kaz, said Jesper nervously. Go on, find your balls and give the order. What game was Kaz playing? Had he expected this? Had he just assumed Inej would find her way to the guards in time? She glanced down again. Giles radiated anticipation. He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. Inej's steps faltered, and she had to fight not to go sliding right off the edge of the roof. He's going to do it. I'm going to watch Kaz die. Fire, Giles shouted. 8 gunshots split the air. Big Bolliger let loose a cry and crumpled to the ground. Damn it, shouted Jesper, dropping to one knee beside Bolliger and pressing his hand to the bullet wound as the big man moaned. You worthless podge, he yelled at Giles. You just violated neutral territory. Nothing to say you didn't shoot first, Giles replied. And who's gonna know? None of you are walking out of here. Giles' voice sounded too high. He was trying to maintain his composure, but Inej could hear panic pulsing against his words, the startled wing beat of a frightened bird. Why? Moments before he'd been all bluster. That was when Inej saw Kaz still hadn't moved. You don't look well, Giles. I'm just fine, he said, but he wasn't. He looked pale and shaky. His eyes were darting right and left, as if searching the shadow walkway of the roof. Are you? Kaz asked conversationally. Things aren't going quite as planned, are they? Kaz, Jesper said. Bollinger's bleeding bad. Good, said Kaz. Kaz, he needs a medic. Kaz spared the wounded man the barest glance. What he needs to do is stop his belly aching and be glad I didn't have Holst take him down with a headshot. Even from above, Inej saw Giles flinch. That's this guard's name, isn't it? Kaz asked. Willem Holst and Bert Van Dahl? The 2 city guards on duty tonight, the ones you emptied the Black Tip's coffers to bribe? Giles said nothing. Willem Holst, Kaz said loudly, his voice floating up to the roof. Likes to gamble almost as much as Jesper does, so your money held a lot of appeal. But Holst had a much bigger problem. Let's call them urges. I won't go into detail. A secret's not like coin. It doesn't keep its value in the spending. You'll just have to trust me when I say this one would turn even your stomach. Isn't that right, Holst? The response was another gunshot. It struck the cobblestones near Giles' feet. Giles released a shocked bleat and sprang back. This time Inej had a better chance to track the origin of the gunfire. The shot had come from somewhere near the west side of the building. If Holst was there, that meant the other guard, Bert Van Dahl, would be on the east side. Had Kaz managed to neutralize him too, or was he counting on her? She sped over the gables. Just shoot him, Holst, Giles bellowed, desperation sawing at his voice. Shoot him in the head. Kaz snorted in disgust. Do you really think that the secret would die with me? Go on, Holst, he said. Put a bullet in my skull. There'll be messengers sprinting to your wife and your watch's captain's doors before I hit the ground. No shot came. How? Giles said bitterly. How did you even know who would be on duty tonight? I had to pay through the gills to get that roster. You couldn't have outbid me. Let's say my currency carries more sway. Money is money. I trade in information. Giles, the things men do when they think no one is looking. Shame holds more value than coin ever can. He was grandstanding, and Inej saw that, buying her time as she leapt over the slate shingles. Are you worried about the second guard? Good old Bert Van Dahl? Kaz asked. Maybe he's up there right now wondering what he should do. Shoot me, shoot Holst, Or maybe I got to him too, and he's getting ready to blow a hole in your chest, Giles. He leaned in as if he and Giles were sharing a great secret. Why not give Vendal the order and find out? Giles opened and closed his mouth like a carp, then bellowed, Vendal! Just as Vendal parted his lips to answer, Inej slipped behind him and placed a blade to his throat. She'd barely had time to pick out his shadow and slide down the roof tiles. Saints, Kaz liked to cut it close. Shh, she whispered in Vandal's ear. She gave him a tiny jab in the side so he could feel the point of her second dagger pressed against his kidney. Please, he moaned. I like it when men beg, she said, but this isn't the time for that. Below, she could see Giles' chest rising and falling of panicked breaths. Vendal, he shouted again. There was rage on his face when he turned back to Kaz. Always one step ahead, aren't you? Giles, when it comes to you, I'd say I have a running start. But Giles just smiled. A tiny smile, tight and satisfied. A victor's smile, Inej realized with fresh fear. The race isn't over yet. Giles reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy black pistol. Finally, Kaz said, the big reveal. Now Jesper can stop keening over Bolliger like a wet-eyed woman. Jesper stared at the gun with stunned, furious eyes. Bolliger searched him. Oh, Big Ball, you idiot, he groaned. Inej couldn't believe what she was seeing. The card in her arms released a tiny squeak. In her anger and surprise, she'd accidentally tightened her grip. Relax, she said, easing her hold. But, all saints, she wanted to put a knife through something. Big Bolliger had been the one to pat down Giles. There was no way he could have missed the pistol. He'd betrayed them. Was that why Kaz had insisted on bringing Big Bolliger here tonight? So we'd have public confirmation that Bolliger had gone over to the Black Tips? It was certainly why he'd let Holst put a bullet in Bolliger's gut. But so what? Now everyone knew Big Ball was a traitor. Kaz still had a gun pointed to his chest. Giles smirked. Kaz Brecker, the great escape artist. How are you going to wiggle your way out of this one? Going out the same way I came in? Kaz ignored the pistol, turning his attention to the big man lying on the ground. Do you know what your problem is, Bolliger? He jabbed at the wound in Big Ball's stomach with the tip of his cane. That wasn't a rhetorical question. Do you know what your biggest problem is? Bolliger mewled. No. Give me a guess, Kaz hissed. Big Ball said nothing, just released another trembling whimper. All right, I'll tell you. You're lazy. I know it. Everyone knows it. So I have to ask myself why my laziest bouncer was getting up early, twice a week, to walk 2 extra miles to Silas Fry for breakfast, especially when the eggs are so much better at the coop room. Big Bull becomes an early riser. The Black Tips start throwing their weight around Fifth Harbor, and then intercept our biggest shipment of Jurda. It wasn't a tough connection to make. He sighed and said to Giles, this is what happens when stupid people start making big plans, yeah? Doesn't matter much now, does it? Replied Giles. This gets ugly, I'm shooting from close range. Maybe your guards get me, or my guys, but no way you're going to dodge this bullet. Kaz stepped into the barrel of the gun so it was pressed directly against his chest. No way at all, Giles. You think I won't do it? Oh, I think you'd do it gladly, with a song in your black heart. But you won't. Not tonight. Giles' finger twitched on the trigger. Kaz, Jesper said, this whole shoot me thing is starting to concern me. Uman didn't bother to object to Jesper mouthing off this time. One man was down. Neutral territory had been violated, the sharp tang of gunpowder already hanging in the air, and along with it a question, unspoken in the quiet, as if the Reaper himself awaited the answer. How much blood will be shed tonight? In the distance a siren wailed. 19 Burstrat, Kaz said. Giles had been shifting slightly from foot to foot. Now he went very still. That's your girl's address, isn't it, Giles? Giles swallowed. Don't have a girl. Oh, yes you do, crooned Kaz. She's pretty, too. Well, pretty enough for a fink like you. Seems sweet. You love her, don't you? Even from the rooftop, Inej could see the sheen of sweat on Giles' waxen face. Of course you do. No one that fine should ever have looked twice at barrel scum like you, but she's different. She finds you charming. Sure sign of madness if you ask me, but love is strange that way. Does she like to rest her pretty head on your shoulder, listen to you talk about your day? Giles looked at Cass as if he were finally seeing him for the first time. The boy he'd been talking to had been cocky, restless, easily amused, but not frightening. Not really. Now the monster was here, dead-eyed and unafraid. Cass Brecker was gone, and Dirty Hands had come to see the rough work done. She lives at 19 Burstrat, Cass said in his gravelly rasp. 3 floors up, geraniums in the window boxes. There are 2 dregs waiting outside her door right now, and if I don't walk out of here whole and feeling righteous, they will set that place alight from floor to rooftop. It will go up in seconds, burning from both ends, with poor Elise trapped in the middle. Her blonde hair will catch first, like the wick of a candle. You're bluffing, said Giles, but his pistol hand was trembling. Cass lifted his head and inhaled deeply. Getting late now. You heard the siren. I smell the harbor on the wind, sea and salt, and maybe... Is that smoke I smell too? There was pleasure in his voice. Oh, saints, Cass, Inej thought miserably. What have you done now? Again, Giles' finger twitched on the trigger, and Inej tensed. I know, Giles, I know, Cass said sympathetically. All that planning and scheming and bribing for nothing. That's what you're thinking right now. How bad it will feel to walk home knowing that you've lost. How angry your boss is going to be when you show up empty-handed and that much poorer for it. How satisfying it would be to put a bullet in my heart. You can do it. Pull the trigger. We can all go down together. They can take our bodies out to Reaper's barge for burning, like all paupers go. Or you can take the blow to your pride. Go back to Burstrat. Lay your head in your girl's lap. Fall asleep, still breathing, and dream of revenge. It's up to you, Giles. Do we get to go home tonight? Giles searched Cass's gaze, and whoever he saw there made his shoulders sag, and Inej was surprised to feel a pang of pity for him. He'd walked into this place buoyed on bravado, a survivor, a champion of the barrel. He'd leave as another victim of Cass Brecker. You'll get what's coming to you someday, Brecker. I will, said Cass, if there's any justice in the world, and we all know how likely that is. Giles let his arm drop. The pistol hung uselessly by his side. Cass stepped back, brushing the front of his shirt where the gun barrel had rested. Go tell your general to keep the black tips out of Fifth Harbor, and that we expect him to make amends for the shipment of Jurda we lost. Plus 5% for drawing steel on neutral ground, and 5% more for being such a spectacular bunch of asses. Then Cass's cane swung up in a sudden, sharp arc. Giles screamed as his wrist bones shattered. The gun clattered to the paving stones. I stood down, cried Giles, cradling his hand. I stood down. You draw on me again, I'll break both your wrists, and you'll have to hire someone to help you take a piss. So Cass tipped the brim of his hat up with the head of his cane. Or maybe you can get the lovely Elise to do it for you. Cass crouched down beside Bolliger. The big man whimpered. Look at me, Bolliger. Assuming you don't bleed to death tonight, you have until sunset tomorrow to get out of Ketterdam. I hear you're anywhere near the city limits, and they'll find you stuffed in a keg at Scylla's Fry. Then he looked at Giles. You help Bolliger, or I find he's running with the black tips. Don't think I won't come after you. Please, Cass, moaned Bolliger. You had a home, and you put a wrecking ball through the front door, Bolliger. Don't look for sympathy from me. He rose and checked his pocket watch. I didn't expect this to go on so long. I'd best be on my way, or poor Elise will be getting a trifle warm. Giles shook his head. There's something wrong with you, Brecker. I don't know what you are, but you're not made right. Cass cocked his head to one side. You're from the suburbs, aren't you, Giles? Came to the city to try your luck. He smoothed his lapel with one gloved hand. Well, I'm the kind of bastard they only manufacture in the barrel. Despite the loaded gun at the black tip's feet, Cass turned his back on them and limped across the cobblestones toward the eastern arch. Jasper squatted down next to Bolliger and gave him a gentle pat on the cheek. Idiot, he said sadly, and followed Cass out of the exchange. From the roof, Inej continued to watch as Ooman picked up and holstered Giles' gun. and the blacktips said a few quiet words to each other. "Don't leave," Big Bodger begged. "Don't leave me." He tried to cling to the cuff of Gil's trousers. Gil shook him off. They left him curled on the side, leaking blood onto the cobblestones. Inej plucked Vendal's rifle from his hands before she released him. "Go home," she told the guard. He cast a single, terrified glance over his shoulder and sprinted off down the walkway. Far below, Big Bod started trying to drag himself across the floor of the exchange. He might be stupid enough to cross Kaz Brecker, but he'd survived the slung in the barrel, and that took will. He might make it. "Help him," a voice inside her said. Until a few moments ago, he'd been her brother in arms. It seemed wrong to leave him alone. She could go to him, offer to put him out of his misery quickly, hold his hand as he passed. She could fetch a medic to save him. Instead, she spoke a quick prayer in the language of her saints and began the steep climb down the outer wall. Inej pitied the boy who might die alone with no one to comfort him in his last hours, or who might live and spend his life as an exile. But the night's work wasn't yet over, and the Wraith didn't have time for traitors. That was the first 2 chapters from 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. As I said, every chapter you get to follow a different character. The next one was Kaz. Inej is one of my favorites. Who doesn't love her? And, of course, I adore Jesper as well. There's really not a single crow that I dislike. I hope that you enjoyed this very long reading, unboxing, rambly video. I had a lot of fun with you. And reading one of my favorite books of all time. If it sounded good to you, please pick up a copy and give it a read if you haven't. Or